You know, in our work, in our teams, and just in our daily lives, we are surrounded by these invisible walls. They're not made of brick, but they can stop a brilliant idea cold, create total confusion, and just lead to some major frustration. So today, we're going to talk about these communication barriers.
Oh yeah, we've all been there, right? You feel like you've explained something perfectly, but the other person is just not getting it. Or maybe you're on the other side of it, and the message you're receiving sounds like pure static. That feeling? That's what this is all about.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to define the problem, what these walls actually are. Then we'll break down the 4 big types of barriers. After that, we'll get to the good stuff, how to actually build bridges instead of walls. And we'll wrap it all up with one key takeaway you can use literally today. So let's get right into it and put a name to this problem. What are these invisible walls that just get in the way of a clear message? Well, according to our source material, they're basically anything that stops information from flowing smoothly from one person to another. These barriers can twist the meaning, they can slow it down, or they can just stop it completely. Think of them as the glitches in the communication system.
And these glitches, they fall into 4 main categories, which we're going to unpack one by one. You've got semantic barriers, which are all about the words we use. Then there's psychological, which is what's going on in our own heads. We've also got organizational, which is about the systems we work in. And finally, personal barriers, which come from our own unique attitudes.
Let's start with the first 2 categories, because these are probably the most common culprits. We're talking about the words we choose and the way our own minds decide to process or, not process the information we get. So semantic barriers are all about meaning. This happens when the person sending the message and the person receiving it interpret the language completely differently. The problem isn't the idea itself, but the words or the symbols that were used to express it. Just look at this. A vague request like, "handle that thing," is a classic communication trap. I mean, what thing? When is the client arriving? It forces the other person to guess. But the clear version? It leaves 0 room for doubt. This is also a perfect example of an unclarified assumption. The sender just assumes the receiver knows exactly what they're talking about, but they never actually check. And it's not just vague wording. The same symbols can mean totally different things. Like here, PTO could cause chaos in a global company. Or a bad translation can completely change the urgency of a request. But it goes deeper. It could be using technical jargon with people who won't get it. Or even just misreading body language. Does a nod mean "I agree," or does it just mean "I hear you"? That's a semantic barrier.
Okay, next up, psychological barriers. These are all the internal filters we have. There are emotions, our biases, our own state of mind, and they can totally warp a message, even if it's worded perfectly.
One of the biggest psychological barriers is what's called premature evaluation. That's when you jump to a conclusion before the other person has even finished talking. Thinking, "This won't work, we've already tried it," just slams the door on any real conversation, and it absolutely kills new ideas before they can even breathe. Remember playing the telephone game as a kid? Well, that's a real thing in the working world. It's called loss by transmission. As a message gets passed from one person to the next, little pieces get left out, details get twisted, and by the end, the message looks nothing like it did at the start. And this mental filtering happens in other ways too. Simple lack of attention. Maybe you're distracted by your phone or you're just daydreaming. Then there's poor retention, where we honestly just forget key parts. But maybe the worst one is distrust. If you don't trust the person speaking, you're going to second-guess everything they say, looking for some kind of hidden meaning. All right, so we've talked about words and we've talked about what's going on in our minds. Now let's zoom out and look at the systems we work in and the personal stuff we all carry around with us. So organizational barriers are actually built into the structure of a company. This isn't about one person's mistake. We're talking about systemic problems that make it hard for everyone to communicate clearly. This could be something like a super rigid policy that makes you go through 10 different people just for a simple approval, or a huge one, status differences. A junior employee is just too afraid to speak up and share a good idea with a senior manager. And sometimes it's the facilities themselves. Picture this. A company puts out a suggestion box, but nobody has the key or ever checks it. That box, which was supposed to build a bridge, just became another wall. That's an organizational barrier. And finally, we get to personal barriers. These are really deep-seated. They're the internal filters created by our own backgrounds, our own attitudes, and they affect both how we send a message and how we hear one. These personal barriers can be especially damaging when they're coming from people in charge. A manager who's afraid of their authority being challenged might shoot down a great idea just to stay in control. Or, if they don't have confidence in their team, they might dismiss their input without even really thinking about it. And that leads to a team that's just unwilling to communicate. I mean, why would you, if you know you'll be ignored?
Okay, we've gone through all the problems. We've seen the walls. Now let's talk about how to fix it. How do we actually start tearing those walls down and building some bridges instead?
Here's a really practical toolkit. First, just think before you speak. Really clarify your own idea. Second, think about your audience. What do they need to hear? Third, and this one is so important, be a good listener. Communication is not just about talking. And finally, make sure there's a feedback loop. Follow up to make sure your message didn't just get delivered, but that it was actually understood.
So here's the bottom line. Communication is never a one-way street. It's more like a dance. It takes active work and a bit of empathy from everyone involved to make sure the message actually lands the way it was intended.
All right, let's bring this all home. If you only remember one thing from all of this, let it be this simple little framework.
The next time you feel a conversation getting tangled up, just ask yourself, which wall did we just hit? Was it the words we used? A semantic barrier? Was it our own mindset? A psychological one? Was it a problem with the system? Or was it something more personal? Just identifying the wall is the very first step to breaking it down. So, I'll leave you with this question. Think about your next conversation, your next email, your next meeting. What is one small thing you can do to tear down one of these walls and make your communication just that little bit clearer?